some findings. That finding can be either the frequency of an outcome or maybe the effect to outcome. What is the effect and how it is affecting the outcome? When we get to know these two findings, it should be as close to the reality of the individuals in the sample. So that is what we call as internal validity. And then based on these findings, our conclusions of the sample should be generalizable, or they should be we should be able to extrapolate that to the population. So this is what we call as the external validity. So this is an important thing for even the MCQs. So this in a nutshell captures the internal and the external validity, which is the main basis of the objectives of epidemiological studies, be it case control, be it cohort, be it some experimental studies. So internal validity means how accurately we can estimate what is the disease frequency in percentage and what is the effect of exposure on the outcome. So that is what we mainly aim to see, whether any exposure is related or is giving rise to the health outcome or not in the study population. But in terms of internal validity, we are working on the sample. And when that sample, we are able to get an estimate which is generalizable to the target population, that is what is known as external validity. So based on this, whenever I am trying to have an analysis or an assessment of any kind of epidemiological study and its findings, we usually term it in terms of the accuracy of our findings. And there are two main things which we look into, that is precision and validity. So if you look at this circle, inside the circles there are 4 pies, and in each of them, take it as the dart. The center of the dart has to be attacked. So that is what is our main intention for doing any kind of study, to find out the precise result or the precise say prevalence or the frequency or the effect size. And when I am very near to the truth, that is what is known as validity. And I'm doing this study say 15 times and I'm getting almost similar results, that is what is known as repeatability or precision. So when I look at this circle, this means that the study is precise as well as valid. But in the next circle or in the next dart, you can see it is not near the center. That means it is not near the truth, but however it is clustered around almost similar values. So that is what is known as precision, but not a valid finding. The next one, which shows that it is all scattered around, so does not have repeatability, not precise, but it is quite near to the center, which is the real truth. Hence, it is a valid finding. And in the last box or the pie, you can see that the findings are neither precise nor valid. So again, this is a take back slide for one of your major important MCQs of how whether it is precise and whether it is valid or not. We are going to take this example throughout this session. So if I read some day morning, one fine morning in the newspaper that coffee drinking doubles the risk of heart attack. Now, does any question come to my mind? Yes, it says, oh, I'm drinking coffee, so that means I'm at double risk of heart attack. But then, do you think this is a valid answer? Do you think it is precise? What was the sample involved? What was the outcome which were checked? So when I'm thinking of any kind of finding of an epidemiological study, I need to know whether this association is real or causal, that is what is the technical term, or whether it is just a crude association by chance. So when I'm doing this assessment, I need to see what all errors have gone in the in the conduction of this study. So there are 2 types of errors in estimating the findings. So here the outcome is heart attack, and the input variable, that is the drinking of coffee. So there are 2 things.
Hello, ma'am, we cannot see the slides.
Is it visible now?
No, nothing is visible.
No.
It is a
Is
dark
it visible?
screen.
Is it visible?
No,
It's
no.
not visible, ma'am. It's not visible.
Just a minute. I'll stop sharing and share it again. Just 1 minute.
हाँ રીશેર કરો ને એકવાર વાંધો નહીં
હવે થાય છે સર? દેખાય છે?
એક જ મિનિટ હજી આવી નથી મને તો થોડું હશે ફરીવાર આપણે
So 1 minute, I'll just start with the I'll start with another network. Just give me a second.
हाँ तो जी मैम
Yes, ma'am.
Is it visible now? Hello.
ના નથી
Yeah.
નથી આવ્યું હજુ સુધી
So share to થાય છે. I'm not sure why it's not visible. Net bhi છે. Can I mail it to you?
હા એવું કરતો ને
Or do I try again? Just 1 minute.
એકવાર છેલ્લી વાર ટ્રાય કરી
Uh-huh. Is it visible?
યસ યસ યસ
Yes,
યસ
ma'am.
યસ
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
sorry for that. Yeah, thank you. So there are two errors which we are going to check. One is the random error and the second one is the non-random error. So random error is by chance. Random error could be because of some sample size irregularities or wrong sample size calculation or some wrong measurements. And basically they could be due to unknown or uncontrollable causes. Another MCQ which you should know. And the systematic errors are mainly this, and biases will occur systematically. You need to reduce these biases right from your design stage to the conduction of the study to the analysis part. Now, there's association between exposure and outcome among the study participant will differ from causal association in the population if there are errors in estimation. So these are the three main threads in epidemiological studies which will affect our findings and our generalizability in the population. So one is selection bias, the second is information bias, and the third is confounding. When I talk about selection bias, it means whether the study participations are accurately representing my target population. Maybe I'm doing a study in second trimester females and it is being generalized to the third trimester pregnant women, which does not give a sound selection criteria. So biased results from procedures may occur used to select individuals for inclusion in the study as well as in the analysis. So these are where selection bias can occur in epidemiological studies. One is if I'm taking data or taking cases from only those cases which are notified. So obviously only the exposed cases will come and not the general population. If it is some screening or diagnostic criteria, then there is a systematic inclusion only of those who are exposed to a particular variable or an exposure. If I'm taking only cases from those who are admitted to the healthcare facilities, again, the cases will be patients exposed, not exposed, controls or subjects exposed or not exposed, and this will not be.
કલ્પિતરાબેન સોરી
Huh,
પણ
sir?
એકચ્યુઅલી સ્લાઇડ ચેન્જ નથી થતી somehow
Okay. હવે સર આમાં થઈ જાય છે?
ના તમે સ્ટોપ કરો એકવાર રીશેર કરી અને હોલ સ્ક્રીન કરજો પીપીટી ન કરતા અનશેર કરો એકવાર
Okay.
સ્ટોપ શેર કરો
હા.
હવે
Again sharing.
હા અગેન શેરિંગ ના ઓપ્શનમાં સ્ક્રીન ફૂલ સ્ક્રીન જ આપજો કોઈ પણ એક વિન્ડોઝ કેવું ન લેતા
Okay, sir. Entire screen કરું છું.
હા એન્ટાયર સ્ક્રીન કરો
એક સેકન્ડ. હવે આમાં સ્લાઇડ શો કરું કે is it visible? The slides are.
I think ગ્રેજ્યુઅલી આવશે હજુ સુધી આવી નથી પણ ઇટ વિલ કમ એવું આવી ગયું કે તમે શેર કરી રહ્યા છો પણ
Okay.
હજી સુધી શેર હા હવે આવી રહ્યું છે ધીમે ધીમે કમિંગ
So, sir, હું without slide show કરું, is it better that way?
હા ચાલશે ચાલશે એ પણ એક મિનિટ હજી સ્લાઇડ આવી નથી મને લાગે ઓવરઓલ છે ને કનેક્ટિવિટી સ્લો છે ઓવરઓલ
Okay.
એટલા માટે આપણે વાર લાગી રહી છે હજી સુધી
Okay,
સ્લાઇડ
sir.
એવું સ્પેસ આવી ગઈ કે તમે સ્ક્રીન શેર કરી રહ્યા છો પણ હજી સુધી સ્લાઇડ નથી આવી
હવે આવી?
ના નથી આવી એક મિનિટ જો તો હું શેર કરું છું એ તમને દેખાય છે
No, sir.
હા હવે દેખાઈ ગયો છે જુઓ
હા હા હવે દેખાય છે.
દેખાય
Should I mail my slides?
હા
હું તમને મેલ કરી
હા
દઉં
એવું
સર?
કરી દો. હા મેલ કરી દો, મેલ
Can
કરી
you-
દો. અને આપણે એવું
હા
કરીએ,
સર મેલ, હા મેલ આઈડી
હા
કહેશો સર?
ડોક્ટર કેદાર આર યુ ધેર? ડોક્ટર કેદાર આર યુ ધેર?
Yes, I have joined.
So can you share the screen?
Fine,
Let
I'll
me
share it to
try.
Kedar.
My PPT you want to share?
તમારો અલગ જ છે ને, તો તમારો presentation પર આવી ગયો.
I have shared the PPT with Kedar also.
Okay.
Not visible.
No.
So we do one thing.
Sir, can we share
Meanwhile,
our
Dr.
PPTs
Kedar,
to
you
you?
also. Yes, please mail me. And meanwhile, I request Dr. Hitesh Chauhan, he is here only, to start his session. And meanwhile, we will get both the PPT from both of you, and then we will share from here.
Okay, sir. So please share your email ID.
Yes, sir. I am writing in the chat box. CJ Saha 79.
સાહેબ મારું દેખાય છે હવે PPT?
ના નથી દેખાતું.
Nah.
Actually. ઓકે, ત્યાં સુધી આપણે ડોક્ટર હિતેશની એક મિનિટ. તમારી મોબાઈલમાંથી વિઝિબલ થઈ રહી છે.
થઈ રહી છે મોબાઈલમાંથી વિઝિબલ?
તો PPT ખુલે.
સર મેં મેલ કર્યો તમને.
સ્ક્રીન તમારી વિઝિબલ છે, બે સાઈડ તમારા મોબાઈલમાં દેખાઈ રહી છે.
તો હા બસ, તો એ ક્વોલિટેટિવ રિસર્ચ વાળી છે મારી.
ઓકે, એક કામ કરીએ ડોક્ટર કેદાર, તમે અને કલ્પિતા બેન મને મેલ કરી દો, એટલે અહીંથી પછી અમે
Okay.
ફૂલ સ્ક્રીન જ કરી દઈશું.
નથી થતું ફૂલ સ્ક્રીન
Okay,
આમાં?
sir.
ના, એટલે મને લાગે તમે આડો કરશો પછી દેખાશે. હા, તો હવે એકચ્યુઅલી શું કરી દીધા છે કે we start with Dr. Hitesh and after that we will have Total blackout was there for a second. So I think we will be starting now again. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes,
Yes,
you're
sir.
audible.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, okay, okay. So I think today God wishes us that you start few minutes late. So we are starting now. So we'll start with Dr. Kalpitra ma'am only. Available.
Okay, sir. So would you be sharing?
Yeah, we will be sharing from here.
PHI, PHVD, VDD, VHR, VHR.
Top second. At the Gmail. Okay. Let me try to share from my. Okay. Can you see the screen now?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Okay, okay. So Dr. Kalpitra, you can start now.
So should I continue or start from the beginning?
No, you can continue. Which number slide was there?
Slide 8.
Let me know. Was this?
Not visible, sir.
Okay. Okay.
It reads selection.
Errors in estimation. Are you, were you there? Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. The next one, please.
Okay.
So the next slide.
I did. So
Yes.
yeah, okay.
Yes, sir. Okay. So next also, sir. The next one, sorry. So these were the three biases which we need to take care of. One is selection, information, and confounding. We were talking about the selection bias, which meant, so I'll just continue till it comes, which means whether the study participants are actually representing our target population, and had given you one example. And these biases can result from procedures that are used to select the individuals for inclusion. So we'll be talking about how this occurs in the next slide. Next, please.
I think there is too much lag. I don't know why. The net
Yes,
here is
sir.
slow. Overall net is slow. Because I'm here, I'm also looking at the other computer and it is taking too much time.
Okay, sir. Yes, sir.
So I think can you present it without PPT?
Should I? Yes, sir, no issues. I'll try to and then share, or should I share the PPT with, I mean, can you share it with them if they can just go next, if possible?
No, it is not possible. But time lag is
Fine, sir.
too much.
I'll do it without, I'll do it without the PPT.
Okay.
Okay, I'll just
Okay.
keep talking. Okay. So
Yeah.
when we talk about selection bias in epidemiological studies, it could be due to the surveillance. Like if you have a surveillance system in place, only the exposed cases are going to come to us. If we have screening and diagnosis among exposed, obviously we'll have a major chunk only of those exposed, and that will affect our outcome. If we are taking patients or taking participants only from the healthcare facilities, again there will be a selection bias. There may be selective survival, which means that those who are surviving, only those are being taken into our studies. So actually if they are having lesser exposure, that's why they are surviving more, and maybe that's why they are in the study. That will give us a wrong cause and effect relationship. And there could be loss to follow up. Lot many participants dropping out of the study, maybe because they are more exposed, dying, or less exposed and not coming for the study. So these are the various reasons for selection bias. Selection bias can happen in dealing while designing stage. So in this case, what happens is we try to prevent this by taking only the new cases, not the prevalent cases, to rule out survival bias. In case control studies, we can take population design rather than just taking people from or participants from the hospitals and giving them same eligibility criteria as well as diagnostic procedures. If we are talking about data collection stage, we try to minimize non-response by giving a proper follow-up, and as well as taking a record of all those who are lost to follow-up. And this loss to follow-up can be addressed in the analysis stage of the study, where we are comparing those who dropped out versus those who did not drop out. So basically, this is also known as sensitivity analysis or the intention to treat analysis. Again, an important MCQ. The other threat to validity in epidemiological studies can be information bias. Information bias basically means that if there are measurements which are not actually accurately taken to represent the outcome of interest. So maybe in this case, what happens is, if I am an investigator and I will think that, okay, this person is exposed, I will try to glean or take out more information regarding the outcome from that particular participant. So that is what is a kind of information bias. It happens in case control studies, where I'm going from cases and controls to their exposure. So I'll be asking them more in detail about the exposure among the cases. Cases may remember more of their exposure. So that is recall bias. And maybe better exposure data is available in cases because they remember it more. Again, if it is a cohort study, a forward going study, I would like to get more information about exposed to the outcome. So again, this will get some information bias. These two biases, like when it comes to interviewing and investigating, they are termed as investigator biases. Prevarication, that is also one important MCQ, which means that the subject or the participant involved will give you some distorted truth about their exposure. So these things also have to be handled during the conduction stage, and then maybe later in the analysis stage. So dealing with information bias, we shall be sharing the PPT, I think, sir. And there are a list of variables, like we need to have proper operational definitions, give a proper rigid measurement protocol, give proper training, retraining, data audits, how the data is entered, how is it visualized, analyzed, and reanalyzed before publication. So there is one MCQ which says we can deal with information bias with all of these except. So it is better to just go through it during your revision stage. We are again coming back to this: coffee drinking doubles the risk of heart attack. And then we have a third factor that is known as confounding. So confounding is basically confusion of effects. So what happens is, I'm looking at exposure and then I'm looking at the outcome, but at the same time there may be some other factor which is playing along, and it is popping up as one of the reasons for the exposure. So technically, this apparent effect of exposure of interest being distorted because there is some extraneous or outside factor being mixed up with the actual effect, that is known as confounding. You need to know the sentence to get the definition of confounding. So what is the main reason why we need to handle confounding in a good manner is that it may give us an association where it does not exist. It may hide an association when it does exist. It may change the direction of effect. So changing direction of effect means, if smoking leads to lung cancer, it may say that smoking is a protective effect, so people may start smoking. So that is the main thing, where direction of effect being changed is a harmful consequence. So what is a confounder? Basically, it is associated with exposure, it is associated with outcome, and it should not come in the causal pathway. So these are the three conditions which you should know for a confounder. And the example for confounder could be, if I say carrying matches or matchboxes leads to lung cancer. Now, when I talk about carrying matches, it basically means a person who is carrying matchbox may be smoking cigarettes, and because of these smoking cigarettes, it leads to lung cancer. So in this case, smoking cigarettes is the confounder. But what will happen is, I will think that match carrying is the predictor or the exposure, and lung cancer is the outcome. So in the same way, when I talked about this coffee drinking and heart risk of heart attack, coffee drinking may be associated with people who are actually smoking, and because of which they are getting heart attacks. So again, in that case also, smoking becomes the confounder. So how do we deal with confounders? Basically, design stage, like when I'm trying to plan a study, any kind of epidemiological study, I need to see that I am restricting these confounding factors, which are already known based on a review of literature. Maybe I'm matching, so matching the cases and control. If I'm looking at some consequence where it is more affecting males, I could just take males, or I could take only the third trimester female pregnant females in a particular study, if that is the confounding factor. And these confounders are more in case control and cross-sectional studies or cohort studies, but randomization, as in the experimental or clinical trials, helps in reducing confounders to a great extent. In the analysis stage, we can stratify our analysis. I can have smokers, non-smokers, and of those, how many are drinking coffee and getting heart attack, how many are not drinking coffee and getting heart attack. So that kind of stratified analysis will help in removing confounders. Another term which you should know is logistic regression, linear regression, or multivariate analysis. This is a second step after the chi-squared analysis or bivariate analysis, which helps us to rule out confounders. So whenever we have any study and whenever we get some crude association, as in this example, coffee leads to 2 times increased risk of heart attack. This is a crude association. First, I'll have to remove my chances. What are the chances? What is my sample size? Is there any error in measurement? If no, look at whether the selection is proper. Then look at whether information taken by the interviewer is proper. Then rule out the confounder. So these are the 4 steps I will need to rule out. And still, if the cause is leading to the effect or the exposure is leading to the outcome, then we will say that there is a causal association. So just giving this example of coffee increasing the risk of heart attack, what could be the selection bias in coffee drinking? Maybe all the adults who are consenting to take part in my study are coffee drinkers. Maybe I am having low participation rate of those who are not drinking coffee. Maybe they are tea drinkers. Maybe I am just taking hospital patients who already have some disease status, because of which there is selection bias and it is impacting my association with the exposure and the outcome. The second part, it could be information bias. So I have not taken exact coffee intake, maybe the duration, the frequency with which they drink coffee, the time since when they are having coffee, whether they are having black coffee, white coffee. So that reported coffee intake may not be correct. And maybe there is a misdiagnosis of heart attacks. Maybe they are having more of coffee, thereby having more of gastric ulcer, thereby having more of symptoms which may simulate heart attacks. So these are the 2 selection and information biases in the given example. Similarly, as I said, coffee drinkers may be smokers may be more associated with drinking coffee than non-smokers, and because of which there is some association between smoking and getting MI or heart attack. And hence, in this case, we need to rule out smoking as a confounder, and that can be done by stratification. So what I can have is smokers, and then how many drink coffee and getting MI, non-smokers, how many are drinking coffee and getting MI. So this is about the confounders. So in a nutshell, there's a slide which gives you a nutshell, but we can share it with you later. Bias can occur in all epidemiological studies, but lesser in the experimental or the randomized control trials. Bias can occur during the study design, implementation, as well as analysis. Bias will affect the internal and external validity of the study. Biases can be avoided, but biases will help you to reduce your causal and effect relationship. They will help you to give actual reasons. Bias will help you to avoid that. But if it is a chance, you need to just mention it as a limitation. Bias can be prevented in the design, in the conduct, and the analysis stage of your study. So this is about the validation of epidemiological studies. Sir, if we can later share the presentation with them. I had put in some keywords and some MCQs which show what all would be important go to when they're giving the exam. So if that can be shared, that is all about the presentation on validity of epidemiological studies.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Kalpita ma'am. I am talking on behalf of Chennai, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Surely we'll
Thank
share
you.
your PowerPoint. It is good that you finish the job even without PowerPoint. So definitely your voice
Thank you, sir.
as good as your PPT. So thank you for that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kalpita ma'am. Now our next host is our beloved friend, Dr. Kedar Mehta. So, Kedar
Yeah,
bhai, how are you?
Good
Good afternoon.
afternoon. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Jayesh bhai. And
Dr.
yeah, I'll
Kedar
share.
Mehta is associate professor of PSM at Gothi Medical College. He's a good academician and he's one of the pioneer of research who gives me tough competition and motivation both. So his topic is up to him, and I hope you all will enjoy his talk. So over to Kedar bhai. Up to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Jayesh bhai.
இங்க உங்க ரெசிபில போலாம் கையெழுத்து போட்டு கொடுக்கற மாதிரி இருக்கும் டாக்டர் சொல்லியும் நீங்க
I hope the screen is visible.
இப்ப வந்து 500 ரூபாய் மட்டும் கட்டினா போதும் இப்ப வந்து ஆபரேஷன்
அதுக்கப்புறம் நீங்க 2 நாளைக்கு அப்புறம் ரெடி பண்ணுங்க அது
Yes, sir.
மொத்தமா
Visible.
செலவு
Visible.
15,000 வருங்க
Yes,
அது
there
2
is
நாள்ல
some.
ரெடி பண்ணுங்க
We need to
அப்படி
mute
இல்ல
other
உங்களால இங்க செலவு
participant. Like
மேனேஜ் பண்ண
Krishna
முடியும்னா
when his mic is on. Yeah, it's okay.
Yes,
Now
sir.
done.
Carry on, sir.
Yeah. So good afternoon, everyone. And I'm going to talk about in the next 15 minutes about qualitative research methods. So quickly giving you, firstly, we are starting with the important difference between what the quantitative and qualitative research methods. As we can see that in quantitative, the data is in numbers, whereas in qualitative, the data what we collect is in the form of text. Another MCQ which comes up is in the next second difference point, that quantitative is etic perspective, whereas qualitative is emic perspective. So emic perspective is one of the MCQ which is asked, which means that it is more or less subjective, whereas quantitative research methods are more or less objective. So that is a main basic difference, that one is objective quantitative methods, that is etic perspective, whereas qualitative is subjective, which is emic perspective. Coming to the logic of inquiry, if you see here, we are trying to test some formal hypothesis, that is in quantitative methods, whereas in qualitative, we try to derive certain hypothesis. So that is a main difference between these two, quantitative methods and qualitative methods. So when do we use qualitative research methods? So sometimes in MCQ, what is asked is they give you a different scenarios and they say choose an appropriate study design. So say, for example, qualitative research methods are best utilized when we are more or less using certain sensitive topics, or when we want to answer why and how the particular behavior of the community is there. So another example is to view social phenomena holistically. So these are some of the methods when to use qualitative research methods. So it is like why, how, and under what circumstances, or you want to seek depth of understanding, or we want to touch upon certain sensitive topic, right? Or we want to see the behavior of the community. So these all are the conditions or situations when we use qualitative research methods. So what are the methods used in qualitative research? What are the methods used in qualitative research? There are 3 different methods: in-depth interviews, focus group discussions, and participant observation. So again, in MCQ, there may be 4th method which can be attached, and the MCQ can be which is not used in qualitative research. So like survey is the answer, because survey is never used in qualitative research. It is in-depth interviews, FGD, and participant observation. So these are the 3 main methods which are used for qualitative research. Now quickly, I'm going to touch upon these 3 important methods and their advantages and disadvantages as per the module. So looking at the first, in-depth interview. So when do we use in-depth interview? When the topic is very sensitive and we want to find out certain reasons, right? Or the complex subject matter in that case, and the respondent should be knowledgeable. in that situation, we use in-depth interview, and the topic is highly sensitive, which usually the person would not answer when a survey or when on a long run if it is asked. So in such situation, we need to have an in-depth interview. Say, for example, domestic violence experienced by women. So you cannot do a survey in which we need to consult the women and we need to ask about her experience of domestic violence. So such situation, that can be in-depth interview. Second is, what are the reasons for unsafe sexual behavior among people living with HIV? Okay, so there are people living with HIV, then what are the reasons for it, right? Or their unsafe sexual behavior, what are the reasons for it? In that situation also, we use methods like in-depth interview, right? So we want to discover the interviewee's own framework of meaning, and we want to obtain certain rich in-depth information. And technique is, we have an interview guide, we probe when the respondent is not responding, you try to probe certain things, right? So we collect respondents' perspective and words, right? Sorry for the inconvenience. So in in-depth interview, there is an interview guide, and we have certain probes, and we reflect some remarks made by the informant also. Now, the advantage of in-depth interview is we get an advantage of why behavior are practiced, how people think and how they are talking, and what is their behavior. And as I mentioned, another MCQ is emic perspective, that is insider's perspective. The disadvantages, it is not generalizable. Interviews may last very long, and there is a lot of data, time consuming to analyze. The very first difference in quantitative data research methods, we have data in form of numbers, whereas in qualitative data, we have in the form of text. So that is the biggest another disadvantage of in-depth interviews. Coming to FGD, it is, as the name mentioned, it is a focus group discussion. Here there is open-ended group interviews, and we have 6 to 8 participants. So another MCQ which is asked is usually the characteristics of FGD. It includes 6 to 8 participants only. And another important is they should be homogeneous group. That means all the participants have same or similar characteristics. So if I'm taking interview of, say, for example, all ASHA workers or of all faculties, then they would be all faculties. I cannot include resident doctors. Focus group discussion of only all faculties. So all are from medical background and all are faculties of a medical college, right? There is a moderator, there is a note taker, and there is an interview guide also in FGD. When to use? When group interaction is important, when we find out to generate certain idea in a community, or to identify certain local group or specific vocabulary or terminology, evaluating messages for an intervention. So, and when there is cost and time issue, when we are not able to interview, in-depth interview of every individual, at that time, FGD could be a better option. What are the advantages? Some people like more comfortable and talk more openly in group settings, and they are more comfortable rather than in-depth interview and can provide a lot of data in limited time. What are the disadvantages? You cannot talk on sensitive issue in a group. You cannot ask about like sexual behavior of PLHIV in the group. So for sexual behavior of PLHIV, people living with HIV, definitely we have to go for an in-depth interview. Whereas in FGD, we can ask problems faced by people living with HIV in general community. कि community में क्या problems आ रहे? So in that case, you can definitely go for an FGD where all people living with HIV are sitting and you are just asking what are the problems or what are the challenges perceived by them in general, right? So, and of course, transcription, if you do transcription of this FGD, it is 30 to 40 pages. And so analysis is a big challenge. And the last method coming to it is participant observation. So here the researcher becomes participant in social event or group understudy and records the observation. Means you yourself become a part of the event and then you try to observe and qualitatively you analyze all the important information. Here the data is very deep and detailed. The disadvantage is difficult to systematically collect, especially in middle of important event. You cannot take notes also because you are a part of the team and you are observing what is happening there. right? So this method here, notes, you cannot have a note keeper, where note keeper was there in FGD as well as note keeper was there in in-depth interview. In participant observation, you don't have the note keeper. You yourself become a participant. Okay, now coming to the analysis, if you see, there are two main framework. One is grounded theory and one is content analysis. You need to remember this. Sometimes MCQ is asked which of the following doesn't fit in grounded theory or which of this doesn't follow in content analysis. So just to give you the difference between the two, in grounded theory, we have themes, categories, and codes. So when you listen to these terminologies like categories, codes, and themes, right, that becomes grounded theory. And in content analysis, there is a theoretical framework, right, wherein the unit of analysis becomes from the texts and then you come to the code. So in grounded theory, you build upon the themes, whereas in content analysis, from the text verbatim of the participant, कि जो participant के साथ interview हुआ था और तब जो बात हुई थी, so based on that, you have to have a theoretical framework. You can have text converted to codes, categories, and themes, right? Whereas in grounded theory, you already have decided themes. So for example, challenges perceived by TB patients or multi-drug resistant TB patient. So here the theme is already there, that is challenges which have been faced. So challenge is a broad theme and certain categories you can already have pre-decided. So this is grounded theory where you already have something and based on that you are finding out the categories. Whereas in content analysis, you have so many transcript which have been interviews have been taken up, and from that you are trying to find out the important challenges or what are the important facilitators or what are the barriers. So you don't have the theoretical framework established in grounded theory, whereas you have a theoretical framework in the content analysis. So how to use qualitative research? So it can be used first, qualitative, quantitative, and then you can have the study, or you can have quantitative first followed by qualitative. So this is not important from MCQ. So no need to worry if you don't remember this. And or you can have simultaneously also, like quantitative and qualitative study simultaneously you bring to the result. Okay. So to summarize, the take home message is, for the qualitative research, you can triangulate to check the hypothesis. You can triangulate your findings. That means your qualitative findings as well as quantitative findings, whether those both are matching or not. So that way you can triangulate the findings of your research study when you have qualitative plus quantitative. And of course, as I've mentioned, a qualitative research is used to explore why and how, right? Why and how for any research question. Why patients did not come to the hospital, lost to follow-up, what were the reasons for lost to follow-up. In such situation, we go for, or we want to understand the behavior, like what is the stigma or discrimination faced by leprosy patient or domestic violence. These are examples I gave you for qualitative research. So there can be an MCQ where a study design, you have to find out the appropriate suitable study design. So whenever such sensitive topic is there, or when you want to explore why and how of the research study, the answer would be qualitative research methods, right? So that's it in brief about qualitative research. We have 5 days workshop on this qualitative research, which we have completed and summarized in 15 minutes based on your ICMR course manual. That is about introduction to qualitative research, right? So thank you so much.
Thank you,
And
Dr. Kedar.
Yeah, I don't
I
have
don't
time
know
for
that
questions,
research
but
is
if
not
there are
a,
any, you can post in the chat section. We'll be able to reply there directly. Thank you.
yes, in chat box you can raise your queries and all the experts are so enthusiastic they can reply them. Thank you, Dr. Kedar bhai, and it will surely help the exam going all the participants. Thank you, sir. Our next speaker is Dr. Hitesh Chauhan. He is assistant professor in anatomy. He is my room partner also, and the BCBR basic course summary book that we all are reading for reference is compiled by him. So let us hear Dr. Hitesh Chauhan from here only.
Okay. Thank you, Jayesh bhai. So let's start with my topic, the measurements of study variable. As you have just said, there are various types of studies and you will find or collect some data, and that data is our study variables. So what is the variable is? It is a measurable characteristics which varies from person to person or within the same person over a time. For example, we can take a height of an individual. So that will be vary from person to person, and it is also vary in over a time. It is changing from same persons also. Now this variable, as we have just said, Dr. Kedar says that in a qualitative research, we'll found a data that is in a text form. So there are two varieties of the data we can found, that is in a qualitative data or a non-numeric data, and the quantitative data that is a numeric data. So that qualitative data or non-numeric data, that is of two varieties, the nominal variable and ordinal variable. So the nominal variable is the one which non-numeric and they do not have that specific orders like a blood groups. So that may be A positive, B positive, AB positive, but we cannot assign, we cannot make it in a logical orders. So how we can calculate from that measurables? We can take a proportion. For example, in a given group of data, we have A positive blood group is in a 50% of the persons. So that we can put a nominal variable in a by a proportions. Now another variety of variable, that is the ordinal variable. Here we have some logical orders, and that logical orders, for example, we can say that the stages of chronic kidney disease. So it is a stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we can arrange it in a logical orders, and so that we can assign it and we can find out the middle value, that is a median. Another type of the data, that is a numeric data, that are of two varieties, the discrete variable and the continuous variable. So the discrete variable is the one which having a whole number or a full digit. For example, we have a number of children, so they are the full number. We cannot have a half children, right? Now the another one, it is a continuous variable where any value can be present, including its various decimals. That continuous variable is of two varieties, interval variable and the ratio variable. The example of interval variable is the temperature. If we measure the temperature in the centigrade, Celsius or Fahrenheit. So if we say that there will be difference of two values will be a meaningful value. For example, the 90 degrees centigrade and 60 degrees, the difference of it is a 30 degrees centigrade, and same will be reciprocate between 30 and 60 degrees. But in interval variables, that is a no meaningful zero definition. For example, if we say that is 0 degree Fahrenheit, it means a no temperature. No, we have a minus degree temperatures also. So we cannot do a ratio of an interval variable. So the another one, that is a ratio variable, where there is a meaningful zero also. For example, the height cannot be a zero. So the zero will be having a meaningful variable. The test scores, that is also a ratio variables. Of course, not the MCQ, it's having a minus scoring, but we can say that it's a 40 marks, that can be a multiple of 20, or it may be a 80/2. So there are the various types of variables. Now these variables, we have to measure that whatever we can found the data, what is its central value and how it is dispersed in a first or sample group. So let us find out that how that central value is getting calculated. So that will be calculated by a three method: arithmetic mean, median, or mode. Hi, Chef. Can you please fix that? Is anyone, everyone can see the slide changing?
To be here.
Yes.
It will be changing, na?
mean થી આગળ નથી જતું.
Arithmetic mean now it is showing changing. Okay. Okay. So let us continue. So the arithmetic mean that is most commonly used in every data. So sample mean is denoted by x bar and population mean is denoted by mu. Now let us see how we'll calculate it. We have to sum up all the observative value, and now we have to divide that sum by a number of observations so that we can get a mean value. Let us see the example. That is a age of 10 pregnant women having visiting the ANC clinic, and these are the various ages. So let us summarize or sum of all the observations, and we have a number of observation is 10. So we'll divide the sum by a number of observations. So we have a 26 years. So that is our mean age of pregnant woman visiting the ANC clinic. Now let us see the another example, which having a test score of students. So let us see the same way we have measured and take a mean value. Now, if we observe the same thing in a different scenario, and we have added a one more student, which having 100 out of 100. So, and here we have to take a sum of all these observations, and you can see that the observations of total after doing that mean is changing so much, and that is why arithmetic mean is not used in an extreme value. Either it is a very big or very small. So this is a MCQ question. Another one is median. The median means a middle value of the distribution, so that it will divide the distribution exactly into the two halves. So 50% of the data will be found on the below side and 50% on the above side. So let us see how we calculate the median. So first thing which we are missing in calculation of median is we have to arrange the data in an ascending order. And then if the number of observation is odd, the median value is n plus 1 by 2. Or if n is even, we have to take average of the middle two value. Now let us see the example. We have a duration of hospital stay of 11 patients, and we have arranged the data in an ascending order. So we have 11 patients. So median value is n plus 1 by 2. So it is a 11 plus 1 by 2. So it is a sixth value. So we can calculate first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth value, which is a 7. So that is a median of the given data. Now we can see the another example. We have a n is even number. So here we have a take a middle two value and make an average of it, and so that we can calculate the median of that. And here, if you have observed that here we have an extreme value, but the median value is not affected, and that is why median is useful in case of extreme values data. Another one which is measuring for the central value, that is a more, and that is the value that occurs more frequently. And this is the one statistics which can be used for nominal data or qualitative data, or this data which do not have a measurable characteristics. And in a given data, there may be a mode can be exist, or sometimes all participants having a different value. So maybe mode may be absent, and sometimes there may be multiple modes may be present in a given data set. Let us see the example. We have a color preference of people for their car, and we have collected the data. So what should be the mode? Here we have a more frequent, it is a yellow. So mode is yellow. Now we have measured the central value, but the central value, that average, is not sufficient. Why? Because we know that if you are a person with do not know the swimming and your height is 5 foot and the average depth of the swimming pool is 4 feet 5 inch, but the variable shallowest depth of the swimming pool is 3 feet, but the highest depth is a 9 feet. And if you go at the place where there is a 9 feet depth, you will drown. So you should know what is the dispersion of it. So for the dispersion, we require the various methods, that is range, interquartile range, mean deviation from mean, or standard deviation. So range, that is known as a difference between minimum and maximum value of the observations. And it is a very quick and easy indicator, but the disadvantage is it will be influenced by the extreme value, either very big or very small. And what more disadvantage is, here we can only calculate or take in consideration the two sets of data only, the first data and the last data only. Other observations we are not come into consideration. And for that will require interquartile range. So quartile means a 4. So here what we can do, that we divide whole range into 4 quarters. And so that we have a first quartile that is at a 25th percentile, second quartile at the 15th percentile. And remember that 15th percentile is a middle value. So it is a median also. So that can be asked as a twisted one, that you can ask as a median and you have to find out Q2. Secondly, the third quartile, that is at the 75th percentile. So what is interquartile range is? It is interval between the value of third quartile and first quartile. So upper quartile and lower quartile. So interquartile range is equal to Q3 minus Q1. And what is the advantage is? It will not affected by the extreme value. We can only take in consideration the middle 50% of the value. But again, it is a disadvantage also. We can cover only middle 50% of the observations only. So let us see the example. We have body weight of 11 children and we have given a first quartile, median, mean, and third quartile. So you can note it down in your rough paper in your BCBR exams, and you can calculate that Q3 minus Q1. So that is a interquartile range. Now, another one of measurement of the dispersion, that is a mean deviation from the mean. So it is mean absolute deviations. What is the definition? It is the average of absolute deviation of the observation from the arithmetic mean. So let us see how we will calculate. So this is a given data. Now, first what we have to calculate? We have to calculate the mean. So we have calculated the mean. Now what we have to do? We have to subtract the mean from the each observations. So we have subtract the means, and now whatever the deviations we have found, we have to do a mean of that deviation. But one thing we have to keep in mind, that we have to ignore the sign, because if we do not ignore the sign, the mean deviation of mean is always 0. And that is why we have to see that we have to ignore the minus sign in a mean deviation of mean. So what is the advantage is, here we have taken consideration of all the observation, and that is why it is easy to grasp the meaning of that procedure. But disadvantage is, here we have ignoring the signs of deviation from the mean. And usually this is not commonly used in various statistics. Now the standard deviation. What is standard deviation is square root of average of squared deviation of the observation from the arithmetic mean. So let us first see the first compartment, that is average of the square deviation of observation from the arithmetic mean, and that is known as variance. So variance is a standard deviation square, and that is why its unit of variance is unit square. When we want to calculate standard deviation, it is a square root of variance. And that is why the standard deviation is having a same unit of measurement as the observation. And that is why it is useful for further analysis. So if we take arithmetic mean and standard deviation both, that will be very much useful for the description of various data. Now let us see how we'll calculate it. The same example we'll carry forward. So we have a data and we are calculating the mean, and we'll found and deviation of observation from the arithmetic mean. And now we have to do the square of that deviations. And then we have to calculate the average of that square deviation, that is our variance. And we have to calculate the square root of variance. So that is our standard deviations. So we have calculated the standard deviation of one group, like for example of height, and another group like that of the age. Now we have age and height. Age is in the year or in the days, and height is in the centimeter. And if you want to compare both the groups, it is very difficult when there is two different units. And for that, we require coefficient of variation. So this will be the useful where we have to compare the relative variability of different groups with different units of measurements. So what is the definition is? Coefficient of variance is, it is a standard deviation expressed as a percentage of arithmetic mean. So we can say that it is CV is equal to SD upon AM into 100%. So it is a percentage value, and that is why I do not have its unit, and that is why we can compare the both group easily. Let us see the example. In example, usually the mean and standard deviation will be given. So you have to just know the formula, and so that you can calculate the coefficient of variance. Now, what is important is if coefficient of variance is higher, that means the dispersion of the data is more. And if coefficient of variance is lower, that means the estimation of is very much precise. So now let us summarize that in the given data of variable, we have to choose which value we have to find out, either the central value or the dispersion value. So if we have an extreme value is present, then we have to do a median or interquartile range. But if there is no extreme value, we can use the mean or standard deviation. And if there is a qualitative data is available, usually we'll prefer mode or proportions. And commonly we are using mean and standard deviation for the measurements of standard various study variable. That's all for this quick revisions. Thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Hitesh Chauhan. You all must have liked it. Thank you once again, Hitesh Bhai. Over to our next speaker, another friend of mine. So you have already listened, now time to listen Viru. So from the PSM department of Kotri, another faculty, Dr. Parag Bhai Chawda. He'll be online. Yes, Parag Bhai, are you listening me? Dr. Parag Chawda. Yes, so
Good
sir
evening,
is ready. Majama Parag Bhai, yes, so I think, are you sharing the slide from your PC?
Yes, let me just try and see if this works.
Okay, sir.
Yes, working.
Okay,
thank
so
you.
over to you, Parag Bhai.
Can I start? Thank you. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, sir. Continue, you are audible.
Thank you. So today's session, the three topics, 15 minutes each, assigned to me, revolve around something around study population. So I have made one single presentation, including all three of them. And I have reversed just the order. So first we'll be talking a little bit about selecting study population, and within the selecting study population, there are two important concepts which are how do we sample, the sampling methods, and how do we calculate the sample size for a research study. So I'll be going in taking that sequence. Just conceptual clarity, why do we need a sample is because taking the entire population is neither needed nor it is possible. So both the ways, necessity is also not there, neither it is feasible, because it requires a lot of time, money, and resources. These are some of the concepts that all of us need to know, and that would help us answer the MCQs as well as for background understanding. So for in any layman's understanding, the population could be entire population of the country or population of a particular state such as Gujarat and so on. But in research studies, we talk something about what is called as target population. So target population is a population on which our research findings are to be generalized. So let's say हमने research तो कर लिया, लेकिन ये research किन के ऊपर लागू होगा. Suppose हमने type 2 diabetics patients के लिए कोई अच्छी सी नई दवाई ढूंढ ली, तो ये नई दवाई सारे टाइप 2 डायबिटिक्स यूज कर पाएंगे. अगर ऐसा हम एक्स्ट्रापोलेट करना चाहते हैं, तो वो सारे टाइप 2 डायबिटिक्स जो भी होंगे वो हमारे टारगेट पॉपुलेशन होंगे. So target population is here, the example given is, say for example, all the hypertensive patients in India, adult hypertensive patients. Since we cannot do our study on the entire target population, we come down to a subset of that target population, and that's what we refer to as accessible population. So accessible population, next slide में हम देखेंगे कि accessible population कैसे define करते हैं. But here the example given is hypertensive patients who are attending my OPD during the year 2024. And these are all people who are accessible to me, but I am not going to study all of them. I am not going to keep all of them in my study. So probably I am going to take only a subset of the accessible population, which I'll call it as my study sample. So my study sample is actual people who are going to participate in the study. Over the year, I could have 5,000 hypertensive adult patient coming to my OPD, but I might end up selecting only 100 of them. So that would become my sample. Conceptually, if we look at this, from the population, target population, we define by clinical and demographic characteristics. So in the previous examples, if example, hypertension is the clinical indicator and demographic indicator is, we are saying that all the adult people. And from the target population of this, what becomes accessible population is by defining the geographic and temporal criteria. So geographic criteria was all people coming to my OPD, or let's say all people of attending OPD of a particular health facility or something of that sort. Temporal could be in terms of time. So the time could be, say for example, people coming to my OPD in 1 month or across 1 year if the study is of longer duration. So target population we define in terms of clinical and demographic indicators, and we narrow it down to accessible population in terms of how do we restrict it in terms of geography and in terms of the time. And out of this, a subset would be study sample. So clinical demographic indicators as well as geographic and temporal indicators would help me define my inclusion criteria of the study. So ये सारी चीज जो होंगी वो सारे मेरे स्टडी के इंक्लूजन क्राइटेरिया होंगे. नाउ एक्सक्लूजन क्राइटेरिया क्या होगा? बहुत बार ये मिसकंसेप्शन होता है कि जो इंक्लूजन में नहीं बैठता है वो सारा एक्सक्लूजन क्राइटेरिया है. ऐसा नहीं है. सो दे आर नॉट म्यूचुअली एक्सक्लूसिव कैटेगरीज. एक्सक्लूडेड आर पीपल जो इंक्लूजन क्राइटेरिया को मीट करते हैं, बट दे हैव सर्टेन सम स्पेसिफिक स्टेजेस या स्टेटस. उन लोगों को हम एक्सक्लूड करना चाहते हैं. सो एक्सक्लूजन क्राइटेरिया वही लोगों पे अप्लाई होगा जो ऑलरेडी इंक्लूजन क्राइटेरिया मीट करते हैं. सो आउट ऑफ ऑल द पीपल हु आर मीटिंग इंक्लूजन क्राइटेरिया, वी आर एक्सक्लूडिंग सम ऑफ देम बिकॉज ऑफ सम रीजंस. So they are meeting our exclusion criteria, so they will not be part of our study. Otherwise they are very much following the inclusion criteria. So in your sessions also, this one example is taken where the example is designing selection criteria for a clinical trial of low dose metformin to reduce dysmenorrhea in females with polycystic ovary. So if we look at the inclusion criteria, they have used 2 criteria of the target population and 2 criteria of the accessible population. So females in the reproductive age group is demographic indicator. Females with polycystic ovary with dysmenorrhea is the clinical indicator. These are the patients on which the study findings are to be generalized. But the investigator is not going to take all of them in their study. The investigator is going to take people who are geographically accessible, patients attending to OPD, and within a specified time, such as January 1 to December 31st. Now they've offered some exclusion criterion and some indications कि ये reason से आप exclude करना चाहोगे अपनी study में से some participants को. So some participants who interfere with loss or their exclusion might interfere with loss to follow-up. So chances of moving out of location और marriage, तो ये reason से अगर आपको loss to follow-up हो रहा है तो उनको आप लेना नहीं पसंद करोगे, although they might be satisfying your inclusion criteria. Interfering with quality of the data, patients already on metformin therapy for other causes, being at high risk of possible adverse events, hypersensitivity to metformin. तो इन लोगों को हम, although they meet inclusion criteria, we will exclude from the study. So this was one concept which we wanted to clarify. Now this slide you might have already seen somewhere, where we are talking about three important aspects. What is our target population on which we wish to generalize our findings, what is our intended sample, and what ends up being our actual study sample. So ये slide पे हम समझने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं two concepts, one is external validity, the other one is internal validity. So हमारा जो भी intended sample है वही अगर हमारा actual sample हम ले पाएं तो वो internal study findings internally valid कहलाएंगे. External validities की हम अपने sample में जो findings हमें मिला वो अगर टारगेट पॉपुलेशन पे अप्लाई कर पा रहे हैं हम कॉन्फिडेंस से, या हम कॉन्फिडेंस से बोल पा रहे हैं कि हमें हमारी स्टडी में जो मिला फाइंडिंग वही टारगेट पॉपुलेशन को लागू होता है, वी कैन से दैट विद कॉन्फिडेंस. सो विल से दैट आवर एक्सटर्नल वैलिडिटी इज वेरी हाई, वी आर एबल टू जनरलाइज. Right? So there are some requirements. If those requirements are met, that our external validity is very high, we are able to generalize our study findings. Fine. So quantitative research में the usual expectation is that we are able to generalize the study findings. And here comes the role of choosing study participants. So external validity or generalizability is achieved through ensuring that whatever study population that we select is representative of the target population. And second important requirement is that we have studied enough number of people or enough number of sampling units, तभी हम जाके कॉन्फिडेंस से बोल पाएंगे कि हमें जो स्टडी में मिला है वो ही टारगेट पॉपुलेशन में भी लागू होगा. सो सैंपल साइज की बात आएगी. एंड अनदर इंपॉर्टेंट एस्पेक्ट, इसका बहुत सा एमसीक्यू भी आता है, सैंपल्स जब आप सैंपल साइज या सैंपलिंग डिसाइड करने बैठते हो तो एक बहुत बड़ा इंपॉर्टेंट क्राइटेरिया होता है जो अपने को दिमाग में रखना चाहिए, दैट इज अबाउट फीजिबिलिटी और कॉस्ट. राइट. सो when you run through the statistical software and sample size estimation softwares, they might give you any number, but then say for example if they give you numbers such as 15,000 or 1,000 or 1,500, it might not be feasible for you to study those many people, so you'll come down to something lower. So feasibility is also equally important when you actually practically derive your sample size. So it's a balance between the two, scientific rigor in terms of external validity and the feasibility. और ये फिजिबिलिटी को इंश्योर करने के लिए सैंपल साइज कैलकुलेशन में भी एक वैल्यू आएगा, जो हम सैंपल साइज की बात करेंगे तब वापस से वहां पे आएंगे. So this is just a conceptual understanding. Now the next part of the session are these two. How do we ensure that the study sample that I am choosing is representative, and how do I ensure that I have large enough study sample? तो हम sampling methods और sample size की बात करेंगे next sessions में. Now before we do that, a little bit caveat about the generalizability of study findings from different types of study designs. Right, we have gone through study designs yesterday. So in the analytical study designs and in clinical trials, it is easy to generalize. So if for example हमने metformin की बात करी to let's say type 2 diabetics. So ये ट्रायल से फॉर एग्जांपल गुजरात में होता है या फिर केरल में होता है, तो इट इज लाइकली कि केरल में जब रिपीट किया जाएगा तो सिमिलर फाइंडिंग्स मिलेंगे. Right. Same is not the case for descriptive study. Now descriptive study might be, say for example, a study wanting to find out prevalence of type 1 diabetes among school age children. Now that prevalence might be different in Gujarat, might be different in tribal area, might be different in some other area, right? So in descriptive study, whatever finding we are getting might not be generalizable at a very large or wider scale. Whereas in analytical or clinical trials, whatever that we find as a result, it's likely that we will be able to replicate the same findings if we do the similar study, repeat the experiment in some other population. So see, for example, a particular new drug which lowers blood sugar level, which was tested in Australia, it's likely that in India also it would give you similar findings. But if you're trying to find out what's the prevalence of malaria in Australia, it would be different compared to what it could be in let's say in India, right? So when we go talk about the generalizability of study finding, this is especially so in descriptive studies we need to think of uh, things such as time, place, and person, right? So let's say when there is seasonality, so if you so for example are comparing malaria prevalence, four different papers who are have reported malaria prevalence, so you need to check when the study was done. So say for example, if in one of the particular study, the study was done somewhere around say for example July month, the prevalence is going to be high. In other study, if the study was done somewhere in January, the prevalence is likely to be less, right? So now if you are going to generalize your findings, seasonality is a big issue, right? So you need to take care of those variations as well in terms of time, many a times time of the day. So say for example, when you are sampling your patients from your OPD, if throughout the OPD for the disease under question, if you are getting say for example 20 patients from your OPD throughout the day, the patients who present in the early part of your OPD in the morning hours are likely to be patients with severe illness. They had so severe symptoms that they wanted to catch doctor's attention first thing in the morning, versus those patients coming to you towards the end of your OPD are patients who are likely to have less symptoms or milder symptoms. So depending on the time of your that the patient presents in your OPD also might be different. So if let's say in your study all your patients are early morning people, they are all people who are having the severe form of clinical presentation. So that way also the sampling would depend. You would end up sampling a biased sample if you do not take care. Place distribution in descriptive study, the prevalence would be different for many diseases in rural, urban, or tribal areas. Same way, the prevalence would be different. Many a times you are comparing descriptive studies where if you look at the descriptive data, ये स्टडी में पेशेंट का एवरेज एज क्या था वो हम रिपोर्ट करते हैं, इसलिए ताकि जो कोई कंपैरिजन करे, जब कोई अपना रिसर्च रीड करे तो दे कैन रीड इट इन कंटेक्स्ट कि ये लार्जली ओल्डर एडल्ट्स के ऊपर स्टडी है, दैट्स व्हाई we see this much prevalence. This study is among younger adults, that's why this prevalence. If for example if you look at HIV prevalence, it would be different in younger adults versus if it's reported in adolescents, it would be different, and so on. So descriptive studies needed to take care of time, place, and person when they wish to generalize their study findings. Another important thing when you sample is the sampling method. Now the sampling method once again makes more sense when you think of the descriptive studies and analytical studies. Usually आप अपनी OPD में जैसे जैसे patient आते हैं तो आप consecutive sampling करते हो, right? And you would stop when you would you would recruit your participants one by one. Those who meet the inclusion criteria, you keep them in the study, excluding those who are not meeting the exclusion who are meeting the exclusion criteria, and so on, and the sampling is consecutive. But when it comes to descriptive studies, you would need to choose one or the other sampling methods. And the sampling methods conceptually are divided into two. One is probability, the other one is non-probability sampling methods. So non-probability की बात first कर लेते हैं, वो छोटा सा है और quantitative research में use नहीं करते हम usually. So one is convenience, which means कि for example you have seen many medical students doing research among medical students themselves. ICMR में बहुत सारे बच्चे present करते हैं कि हमने medical students में ही ये survey कर लिया. So that's convenience sampling if the research question is not pertaining something problem which is very peculiar to medical students. वर्सेस पर्पसिव सैम्पलिंग. पर्पसिव सैम्पलिंग का मतलब ये है कि हमने कोई रेंडमाइजेशन प्रोसेस नहीं किया, बट हम वो पार्टिसिपेंट के पास गए. फॉर एग्जांपल इफ आई एम इंटरेस्टेड इन डूइंग सम स्टडीज ऑन ऑर्फन चिल्ड्रन, so if I visit an orphanage and take interviews of all people who are there, that would be purposive. I was interested in a particular subpopulation and I went there, right? So that's I purposefully chose an orphanage since my study wanted to do study something about the orphan children. So these are non-probability methods. What is usually used in quantitative research is probability samples, and there are multiple methods. You would have come across the names. Simple random, systematic, stratified, cluster, and multi-series. Now let us look at them very quickly. So simple random is theoretically very simple, practically little difficult. So यहाँ पे हम बात करते हैं कि every person has an equal chance of being selected. So आपकी सैम्पलिंग फ्रेम में अगर 100 लोग हैं तो उसमें से आपको 10 सिलेक्ट करने हैं. आप कंप्यूटर को बोल दोगे कि ये 100 के लिस्ट में से मुझे 10 रैंडम नंबर जनरेट करके दो. सो फायदा यहाँ ये है कि कौन सिलेक्ट होगा उसका डिसीजन ह्यूमन नहीं लेता, उसका डिसीजन इस कंप्यूटर लेता है, which means the chances of bias is reduced. So this is simple random sampling. Practically very difficult because you need to have the entire sampling frame available at the start of the study. ये OPD based study में हम नहीं कर पाएंगे because OPD में आज 5 पेशेंट आएंगे या 15 पेशेंट आएंगे हमें पता नहीं होता है. So we do not have sampling frame in OPD based study. This is commonly used in descriptive studies where we have the sampling frame. Another little bit deviation of the simple random is systematic. तो यहाँ complete randomization नहीं है. Suppose हमें 100 में से 5 select करने हैं तो we'll say every 20th individual will be selected, right? और या 100 में से 10 कर रहे हैं तो we'll say every 10th individual is selected. But first individual को हम select करेंगे 1 और 10 में से कोई एक random number generate करके. So if that random number is 3, we'll say 3rd, 13th, 23rd, 33rd, 40th, 43rd and so on. ये सारे लोग हमारे सैंपल में इंक्लूड किए जाएंगे, राइट? So that's systematic random sampling. Another concept is stratified sampling. Now when our population of interest है वो कोई meaningful substrata में भी divided है. Say for example, many times the researchers are interested in finding out, say for example you are interested in finding out if what's the prevalence of, say for example, suicide ideation among college students, and you strongly feel that the prevalence of suicide ideation would be different across the genders. You would feel that it might be very different in among males and it might be very different among females. So you might say that हम सैम्पलिंग भी 2 स्ट्रेटा में अलग से करेंगे, मेल्स को हम अलग से सैंपल करेंगे, फीमेल्स को भी अलग से सैंपल करेंगे, राइट? सो दैट्स कॉल्ड एज स्ट्रेटिफाइड सैम्पलिंग. समटाइम्स पीपल आर इंटरेस्टेड इन फाइंडिंग आउट the socio-economic status wise prevalences कि higher socio-economic status में ये disease का prevalence ज़्यादा है या कम है and so on, fine. So when you are interested in substrata of the population or subset of the population कि जिसमें आपको special interest है कि इसमें अलग मिल सकता है, so there you ensure and take samples from each of those strata separately and not do the entire sampling for the entire population together. Next two methods are similar. So multi-stage is a conceptual name of a sampling method which is done in larger studies. It is done in multiple stages where the sampling unit is different at each stage. So for example, I've taken just one example. So for example, Ministry of Health, Government of India is interested in finding out what proportion of Indian school teachers are trained in basic life support. So what they can do is India has almost 700 districts. So they might say that we'll do the study in 50 districts only and not 700. So in the first stage, they'll select, let's say they use sample random sampling and select 50 districts out of 700. In the second stage, they might have a list of all the schools available within each of those 50 selected districts. So they might do one on any of those sampling methods and select schools from each district. They might say that from each district we'll take 10 schools. And from each school, they might wish to sample some teachers. So for example, each school might have 20 teachers and we might wish to do the study on only 10 teachers. So we might once again do some sampling there. So in the third stage, we end up selecting the teachers from each school. So the sampling unit changes. In the first stage, the sampling unit was district, and second stage it was schools, and in the third stage it was an individual teacher, right? So each stage the sampling unit changes. So that's multi-stage sampling. Now what is cluster is just one variation of the multi-stage sampling where at first stage we use a method which is known as population proportionate to size. तो ये जो बड़े administrative regions होते हैं, say for example you are trying to do some study in India और आपको district select करने हैं, तो आप population proportionate size method use करके district select करोगे. ये method का फायदा ये होता है कि larger districts have higher probability of getting selected. Right, I'll not go into the depths. This is a little detailed concept, but PPS, population proportionate to size, is a method which is used as a first stage of cluster sampling. So what we have discussed by now is different sampling methods, right? So sampling methods, mainly the representative sampling method, जिसमें randomization होता है. Probability sampling methods are used in quantitative research, and that would help us generalize our findings. So that's what the first concept that we discussed, external validity, ensuring that the sample is representative of the population. Second concept was sample size. The sample is large enough for us to be very confident of our findings, but at the same time small enough for us so that it is feasible. So sample size कैसे determine करें? So choosing sample size depends on whether a study is descriptive or analytical. Descriptive study sample size calculation is easy. It can be done on a calculator because the formulas are easy. Analytical study formula a little complicated. So most commonly we are dependent on using a computer software where we feed certain values and the computer would give us some answer. So let us take, we'll just take two formula for the descriptive study. When your variable of interest is measured on a qualitative scale, as Hitesh bhai mentioned just in the previous session. So say for example, this study is a prevalence measuring study, right? So आपको किसी चीज का prevalence measure करना है, तो ये formula use करते हैं, where n is the sample size, z square is confidence level, जिसका value at 95% हम 1.96 या roughly 2 लेते हैं. P is the proportion of your variable of interest. Q is the complement of P. So Q is 1 minus P. And L square is very interesting. L square is allowable error on either side of the estimated P. तो जब सैंपल साइज हम एस्टिमेट करते हैं ना, तो बहुत बार ये होता है कि स्टेटिस्टिशियन ने जो सैंपल साइज दे दी वही एक है, वैसा नहीं होता यूजुअली. योर सैंपल साइज डिपेंड्स ऑन द फिजिबिलिटी. तो फिजिबिलिटी के हिसाब से आप अलाउबल एरर चेंज कर सकते हो और आप अपना डिजायर्ड सैंपल साइज ले सकते हो. तो आप फिर फाइनल जब आप मैन्युस्क्रिप्ट पब्लिश करोगे तब लिखोगे कि हमने जो सैंपल साइज एस्टिमेट किया था वो इतना एरर लेके किया था, राइट? एग्जांपल लेके समझते हैं. Bookworm prevalence rate from published literature is reported to be around 30%. अदर स्टडीज ने ये रिपोर्ट किया है, हमें अपने रीजन में प्रेवलेंस फाइंड करना है. To detect hookworm prevalence in a community with precision of 3% on either side of the expected prevalence, which means कि अपने स्टडी में अगर वो 20% prevalence मिला तो 3% precision का मतलब ये है कि एक्चुअल प्रेवलेंस स्टडी में हो सकता है 17% टू 23%, ये रेंज में कोई भी हो सकता है. तो हम उतना प्रिसीजन चाहते हैं, हम 6 परसेंटेज पॉइंट वाला प्रिसीजन चाहते हैं, एक रेंज चाहते हैं 6 परसेंटेज पॉइंट वाला, 3% ऑन लोअर साइड एंड 3% ऑन आइदर ऑन अपर साइड ऑफ जो हमें मिल रहा है प्रेवलेंस अपनी स्टडी के बाद. Fine, and this we wish to do at 95% confidence level, right? What will be the required sample size? तो अगर हम फॉर्मूला में फीड करें, अपना z square 1.96 होगा, p अपना 30% है, q 70% है, l square is l is 3, right? सो ये L जो है वो प्रेवेलेंस के रिलेटिव होगा, right? So when your prevalence is expected 30%, you want to be very precise, 3% either side, very precise, right? So 3% precision लेने के लिए आपको 896 सैंपल साइज सैंपल स्टडी करने पड़ेंगे. So how do we practically utilize this formula is that we change. आप बहुत सारे रिसर्चर्स ये करते हैं कि 3 या 4 स्टडीज सिमिलर पहले की ले ली और उसमें से प्रेवलेंस देख लिया, जो प्रेवलेंस में कम प्रेवलेंस का वैल्यू चेंज कर लेते हैं. सो जो प्रेवलेंस सबसे कम सैंपल साइज देता है वो प्रेवलेंस लेके उसको फिर मेथोडोलॉजी सेक्शन में दिखाते हैं. दिस इज नॉट अ गुड प्रैक्टिस. A good practice is, let's say we understand that large sample size might not be feasible for you. आपके लिए हो सकता है 50 पेशेंट स्टडी करना ही पॉसिबल है, तो उस केस में आप L चेंज करिए, P चेंज मत करिए. बिकॉज जब आप P चेंज करोगे तो आपने अपनी मैन्युस्क्रिप्ट में मेथोडोलॉजी सेक्शन में कुछ अलग एक्सपेक्टेड प्रेवलेंस दिखाया होगा. आपका फाइनली जो प्रेवलेंस आपके स्टडी के एंड रिजल्ट्स में आने वाला है वो तो आपके रिजल्ट्स में दिखने ही वाला है. तो दैट स्टार्क कॉन्ट्रास्ट विल बी विजिबल टू द रिव्यूअर्स, इट वुड बी विजिबल टू द रीडर्स ऑफ योर आर्टिकल, राइट? सो कीप your prevalence P, expected prevalence, realistic. Feel free to change the allowable error to the extent that you wish to. In next slide we'll just see कि allowable error change करने में, since allowable error का square है ना, तो allowable error का आंकड़ा आप थोड़ा सा चेंज करोगे, आपकी sample size disproportionately down होगी. तो आप allowable error थोड़ा सा रिलैक्स करोगे, बहुत कम रिक्वायर्ड हो जाएगा. So say for example over here we can see that at the allowable error 3%, required sample size is 896, बट उसको 3 को 4% कर देते हैं तो 500 से काम चल जाता है. अगर allowable error 5% ऑन आइदर साइड कर देते हैं, विच मीन्स कि मेरा प्रेवलेंस 25% आया सैंपल में मेरे स्टडी के अंदर. सो 5% allowable error का मतलब ये है कि रियल में ये प्रेवलेंस कोड रेंज एनीवेयर बिटवीन 20 to 25. ठीक है, वो अगर उसको मैं 10 कर देता हूँ तो अगर मेरी स्टडी में 25% प्रिवेलेंस आया विद एन अलाउबल एरर ऑफ 10 वुड मीन दैट द रियल प्रिवेलेंस इन रियल वर्ल्ड कुड बी एनीवेयर बिटवीन say for example 15 and 35. This still makes some sense कि ये range में आया तो it makes some sense to me. But once you go down, let's say you do it 15 or 20, अगर 20 में allowable error कर लेता हूँ तो 20 सब्जेक्ट स्टडी करने पर भी मेरा काम चल जाएगा, बट देन डज नॉट मेक एनी सेंस बिकॉज अगर मेरा प्रिविलेंस 25% आया तो रियल वर्ल्ड में वो प्रिविलेंस 20 पॉइंट्स ऑन लोअर एंड 20 पॉइंट्स ऑन हायर साइड की रेंज में कहीं भी हो सकता है, विच मीन्स इट कैन रेंज एनीवेयर बिटवीन 5% टू 45%। तो ये इतना बड़ा रेंज है, तो इतने छोटे सैंपल साइज से मेरा एस्टिमेटेड प्रिविलेंस इतनी बड़ी रेंज दिखाएगा, तो उसमें कहीं पे भी हो सकता है, भले मैं स्टडी में 20 आया वो 5% भी हो सकता है, 45% भी हो सकता है, तो इसका ज्यादा मतलब नहीं है, राइट। सो व्हाट वी मीन इज दैट इट्स अ बैलेंस बिटवीन कि आप अलाउबल एरर कितना बड़ा रखो कि आप सैंपल स्टडी भी कर पाओ एंड एट द सेम टाइम आपके कॉन्फिडेंस इंटरवल का जो रेंज है वो थोड़ा सा मीनिंगफुल भी हो। So this is we just one example of qualitative data prevalence measuring study. Similar things can be done on quantitative data where you are trying to find out the mean levels. Fine. So here the formula is little different. PQ की जगह यहाँ sigma square हो जाता है. Fine. Allowable error वैसा का वैसा ही रहता है. So we'll take just one example. This is a very simple example. Sample size is required for to be calculated for a researcher who is interested in finding out mean systolic blood pressure of college student with a standard deviation of 15 millimeters of mercury and 2 points on either side of the estimated mean. The mean is 120. फाइन, ये फॉर्मूला में मीन कहीं पे नहीं है, वो आप ध्यान रखिएगा। जो फॉर्मूला में है वो स्टैंडर्ड डेविएशन है और आप कितना एरर रखना चाहते हो। तो आपका जो एरर है आप अलाउ कर रहे हो वो स्टैंडर्ड डेविएशन के रिलेशन में कितना बड़ा है वो देखा जाता है। फाइन, सो यहाँ स्टैंडर्ड डेविएशन इज 15 मिलीमीटर्स ऑफ मर्क्यूरी एंड उन्होंने बोला है कि हम 2 पॉइंट्स ही रखना चाहते हैं विच इज वेरी स्ट्रिंजेंट। तो सैंपल साइज 216 आ रहा है। अब इसको चेंज क्या करें? सिर्फ फॉर एग्जांपल हमें अगर लगता है कि 216 अचीव कर पाना मुश्किल होगा तो हम चेंज क्या कर सकते हैं? अगले एग्जांपल में हमने समझा था कि अलाउबल एरर चेंज कर दे, तो 2% का चेंज करके अगर 4% कर देते हैं, राइट। सो हम फर्स्ट एग्जांपल में यहाँ 216 ही आ रहा है बिकॉज आर अलाउबल एरर इज 2, बट उस 2 को अगर हम 4 कर देते हैं तो डिस्प्रोपोर्शनेटली कम हो जाएगा। सिंस इट्स अ स्क्वायर, सैंपल साइज इज 4 टाइम्स कम हो गई अपनी। अनदर possibility in quantitative data is that you improve your measuring style. Yeah, fine. So say for example आपका blood pressure measurement instrument को आप calibrate कर दो, you ensure कि बहुत एक ही single researcher जो है वो सारे study participants का blood pressure लेगा, ताकि जो इंटर ऑब्जर्वर वेरिएशन होता है कि दो, सिर्फ एग्जांपल आपके स्टडी में आपने 4 लोगों को रखा है जो पार्टिसिपेंट्स के ब्लड प्रेशर, चारों के ब्लड प्रेशर मेजरमेंट के तरीके अलग हो गए, तो दैट वुड आल्सो ऐड टू द वेरिएबिलिटी, और उसकी वजह से स्टैंडर्ड डेविएशन जो आपके मेजरमेंट्स होंगे उसमें ज्यादा होगा, वेरिएशन ज्यादा होगा, राइट। सो अगर आप एक ही बंदा रखते हो अपने रिसर्च ऑल पार्टिसिपेंट ब्लड प्रेशर मेजर करने के लिए, यू माइट बी एबल टू, it's not guaranteed, but you might be able to reduce your variation within the your data. So if you are able so, then also that's another way of reducing your required sample size, right? तो वो भी हम कर सकते हैं। So this was about descriptive studies where depending on आपका outcome variable कैसे measured है, वो qualitative है, proportion measure करना चाहते हो या mean measure करना चाहते हो, उस हिसाब से sample size आप ऐसे formula से simply calculate कर सकते हो। ये software पे भी available होता है। And then for the analytic studies which are little more complex, you need to go to the softwares and software would ask you multiple values. So for example cohort study है तो आपको पूछेगा कि रिलेटिव रिस्क क्या एक्सपेक्ट आपने किया है एंड सो ऑन। केस कंट्रोल स्टडी में ऑड्स रेशियो पूछेगा, फाइन। So I am not going into the detailed examples because it will take a lot of time and it will need to take help of the softwares, online available softwares for analytical studies, but I'll just explain one important aspect which would be required to be fed into the computer when you are dealing with sample size calculation for analytical studies, and those are the concepts of alpha and beta, right? So this is the last slide where we are trying to understand the statistical errors, right? So on the columns are what is there in reality, what is truth, right? And on the rows is what you find in your study results. So say for example, we'll start with this on the upper right corner where we say that in reality, there is a difference in the study findings. So say for example, we take this example such as a new cancer treatment is made available, and a paper describes the success rate of new cancer treatment compared to the standard treatment which is available right now. Fine. तो अगर आपका नया पेपर वो जो कैंसर ट्रीटमेंट अगर वो सपोज दैट न्यू कैंसर ट्रीटमेंट इज रियली इफेक्टिव, ऑफर्स अ लिटिल बिट एडवांटेज, एंड इफ योर स्टडी हैज सफिशिएंट सैंपल साइज कि वो छोटा सा डिफरेंस भी आप डिटेक्ट कर पाते हो, तो यू आर डूइंग अ करेक्ट कंक्लूजन, व्हिच मींस दैट your study shows significant difference and the real difference also exists. So this would be a correct decision. The sample size is good enough, so this study has good power, right? So power, the range is anywhere between 0.8 to let's say 0.99, यहाँ तक रखते हैं लोग usually. पावर का कॉम्प्लीमेंट है बीटा, पावर इज 1 माइनस बीटा, टाइप 2 एरर को बीटा बोलते हैं. तो टाइप 2 एरर का मतलब क्या हुआ कि रियल लाइफ में ये कैंसर, नई जो कैंसर ट्रीटमेंट है वो थोड़ा सा एडवांटेज दे रही थी, बट हमें उसमें भी इंटरेस्ट था, भले ही थोड़ा सा सर्वाइवल रेट में फर्क दिखा रही है. थिंग्स लाइक कैंसर वी आर इंटरेस्टेड इन दैट स्मॉलेस्ट डिफरेंस एज वेल, बट योर सैंपल साइज वाज नॉट गुड इनफ. तो आपकी स्टडी के फाइंडिंग्स में मिला कि डिफरेंस तो दिख रहा है बट वो स्टेटिस्टिकली सिग्निफिकेंट नहीं है, बिकॉज मे बी वन ऑफ द रीजंस कुड बी योर सैंपल साइज वाज नॉट गुड इनफ. तो ये सिनेरियो में आपने टाइप 2 एरर कमिट करी, राइट? तो इसको बोलते हैं बीटा. दैट्स व्हाई वी से, एंड सिंस बीटा इज अ कॉम्प्लीमेंट ऑफ 1 माइनस बीटा पावर, हम बोलते हैं कि आप करेक्ट डिसीजन लेना चाहोगे. सो जब रियल डिफरेंस है तो आप अपनी स्टडी में से वो डिफरेंस डिटेक्ट करना चाहोगे, व्हिच मींस यू वुड विश योर स्टडी टू बी मोर पावरफुल, व्हिच मींस इनडायरेक्टली दैट योर स्टडी नीड्स टू हैव रीजनेबली गुड सैंपल साइज, राइट? लेट्स टेक अनदर सिनेरियो. हम फर्स्ट कॉलम को ट्रेस करें, जहां पे हम नीचे से शुरू करेंगे, जहां पे हम बोलते हैं कि कोई फार्मास्यूटिकल कंपनी कोई नया ड्रग लेके आया और वो उन्होंने क्लेम किया कि सपोज रियल लाइफ में कोई बहुत ज्यादा डिफरेंस नहीं है बट कॉस्ट बहुत ज्यादा है. फाइन. तो ये सिनेरियो में हम बोलेंगे कि अगर रियल डिफरेंस बहुत ज्यादा नहीं है कंपेयर टू द एग्जिस्टिंग थेरेपी विच इज अवेलेबल इन द मार्केट राइट नाउ, और आपका स्टडी भी यही दिखाता है कि सिग्निफिकेंट डिफरेंस नहीं मिला आपके स्टडी में, यू आर डूइंग अ करेक्ट कंक्लूजन. फाइन. ऑल थिंग्स आर फाइन इन दिस केस. बट अगर इस सिचुएशन में जहां पे रियल वर्ल्ड में बहुत ज्यादा डिफरेंस नहीं है बट आपकी स्टडी ने सिग्निफिकेंट डिफरेंस दिखा दिया, तो व्हाट यू आर कमिटिंग इज टाइप 1 एरर. दिस इज कॉल्ड एज अल्फा. फाइन. सो अल्फा हम 0.05 या 0.01 की रेंज में कहीं पे भी रख सकते हैं. सो अल्फा इज द प्रोबेबिलिटी ऑफ यू कमिटिंग टाइप 1 एरर. तो ये टाइप 1 एरर हम कम करना चाहेंगे. फाइन. इतना कम कि 1% टू 5% ही हम करना चाहेंगे. हम प्रोबेबिलिटी अपनी स्टडी में टाइप 1 एरर करने की 1 to 5% से ज्यादा रखना नहीं चाहते. दैट्स व्हाई द वैल्यू ऑफ अल्फा इज एट 0.01 टू 0.05. ठीक है. हम चाहेंगे कि अगर स्टडी का रियल वर्ल्ड में बहुत ज्यादा डिफरेंस नहीं है तो अपनी स्टडी में भी सिग्निफिकेंट डिफरेंस ना मिले, हम टाइप 1 एरर कमिट ना करें. So these were the errors. I just tried to simplify, and that's what I wanted to share about sample sizes. So we talked about study population today and talked about external validity generalizability, ensuring that it is representative of sufficient size, as well as not forgetting that cost is also important, so feasibility matters equally. This is what I wanted to share from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Parag. So, sample size calculation is very important part so as to choose the study population. So it was a nice lecture from your side. Thank you once again. For all the participants in the chat box, we have shared the YouTube link for today's recording, and you can also ask any question. Still 2 more days are there. So once again for day 3, we'll join tomorrow at 3:30 with the topics as listed in the brochure. And I just want to thank on behalf of Dr. Chinmay sir and DMER to all the participants and all the speakers over there. So on this note, I'm just saying bye from my side. Thank you all, one and all, and see you tomorrow. Have a nice day. Bye.
Thank
Sir,
you.
good evening, sir. Hello.
Hello. Yes. Any question?
सर और रिक्वेस्ट सर, I'm डॉक्टर खलील बात कर रहे हैं सर.
Yes, sir.
सर कल की रिकॉर्डिंग यूट्यूब लिंक में शेयर कर सकते सर?
Requirement?
नहीं, कल जो क्लास हुई थी सर उसका भी यूट्यूब लिंक है तो
रिकॉर्डिंग भी इसमें है जो आपने शेयर किए हैं
उसमें दोनों रिकॉर्डिंग है, कल का भी, आज का भी, और आगे 2 दिन का भी उसी लिंक में मिलेगा आपको.
अच्छा.
Okay, so as Chinmay sir has iterated, matlab it is there available all the lectures of yesterday as well as today in this link. Okay, thank you, sir. Chinmay sir. And sir, can we have your concluding remark if you are available, Chinmay sir?
Much, Dr. Ray sir, for meeting today's session likely. Really to concise today only workshop into 15 minutes. It will be useful for BCBR participants. We also request a feedback from him that was it useful or not. After 25th, you can share on our email ID your feedback. Thank you very much, everyone. All the resource persons, and see you tomorrow again. Thank you.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. With this, I am closing this meeting.